In Chapter 8, we're going to be talking about socio-emotional development in middle and late childhood. And again, this is really roughly the ages of children between 8 and 11. We're going to specifically talk about emotional and personality development. Then we're going to move into families, peers, and then look further into schooling. When we look at the development of self-understanding and children ages 8 to 11, when we talk about their self, we can see that children in this age range begin to describe themselves in terms of psychological characteristic traits. So they'll say, I am popular or nice, helpful, mean, smart, or dumb. They often recognize social characteristics of self, so they'll be able to tell you they're a Girl Scout, they are a Christian, they are a NKU fan. They will Their self-description increasingly involves social comparison, so they can say, I am better at math than most people my age, or I am really good at piano, knowing that most of the people their age do not play the piano. We can see when they are understanding others, there is perspective taking, and this is the idea that social cognitive process involved in assuming the perspective of others and understanding their thoughts and feelings. When students at this age lack this skill, it creates difficulty building relationships with others. So they cannot see how other people could have specific thoughts and feelings and understand those. Typically, children this age become skeptical of others' claims, and without good perspective taking, more likely to be oppositional and have difficulty with relationships. So all of those things are just good to know if you're going to be working with grades roughly 2 through 6. This really applies and speaks loudly for your classroom. Self-esteem and self-concept emerge from parenting and the type of homes that these children are parented in. We can see that self-esteem is global evaluations of their self, and self-concept is the domain-specific evaluations of self. So they can really begin to see that they're not just a person, but they are a good person in regards to self-esteem. And in regards to self-concept, we can see that they can say specifically, academically, I am this, or athletically, I am this. Appearance-wise, they can give themselves specific domain evaluations. Children with high self-esteem differ than children with low self-esteem. Our kiddos with high self-esteem, a lot of times, although they may not do better in school, they have inflated self-esteem can distort their ability. So sometimes the reality and the perception that these kids have doesn't always match, but a lot of times they do have a greater initiative to get things done, and this can be positive or negative if it is spun a certain way. Children with low self-esteem, a lot of times this can be linked to obesity, anxiety, depression, suicide, and delinquency, and it can either be small or just distorted self-perception. When we look at the word self-efficacy, it's the idea that one can master a situation and produce favorable outcomes. So they know, okay, I know what I have to do. I can get that done. On the flip side of this, the opposite of it is helplessness, that they cannot do these things for themselves. Self-regulation is characterized by deliberate efforts to manage one's behavior, emotions, and thoughts. And this leads to an increased social competence and achievement. If you can say, okay, I'm going to regulate myself, I know what I have to do, and I'm really going to focus on that, that can lead to greater achievement because they can really put their nose down and get things done. Erikson gives us a different stages of development, and in his 4th stage we see industry versus inferiority, and that's what these kiddos are in. The industry part is children become interested in how things are made and work, and they receive parental encouragement. The inferiority flip of this is that they cannot do things, that they're not smart enough to investigate the world around them. And a lot of times, parents who see children's efforts as mischief or making a mess encourage the inferiority rather than encouraging that industry. You can figure it out. Let's dig into it. Let's figure it out together. And so a lot of times these children who are not encouraged in the right way are going to go more down the inferiority path. Developmental changes that happen during this time, they can have an improved emotional understanding. They now can experience pride and shame, and it's now more self-generated than other people giving them these thoughts and feelings. The book refers to something as called mental time travel, and it's the ability for these kiddos to anticipate and recall feelings. And so sometimes this can lead to some stress or some excitement, but they can now do this when their younger selves could not. These kiddos have an increased understanding that more than one emotion can be experienced in a particular situation. So let's say you're in third grade and you have a dance recital coming up. You can experience both joy and anxiety at the same time about it. They can also have an increased awareness of the events leading to emotional reactions. Let's say you're in the fourth grade and your friend's about to move away. You can feel sadness and attribute that to that your friend is moving next week. So our emotional development begins to get more complicated and, of course, become more similar to adults. We also have the ability to suppress or conceal negative emotional reactions. So let's say you're in fifth grade and you get really angry at something. You can tone down that anger. They have the ability to use self-initiated strategies for redirecting their feelings. They can kind of cognitively now self-soothe their emotions and be able to process it in their mind. And then they have a capacity for genuine empathy. A fourth grader can easily feel stress or sadness for a friend that's going through a crisis in their life. These kiddos, a lot of times they experience social emotional education programs in their schools. And the Committee for Children and Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning has come up with 2 different programs to improve children's lives. One is called Second Step, and the next one is CASEL, CASEL. On the Second Step program, it teaches social, cognitive, and emotional skills, and it's broken down from preschool to 8th grade, and each grade it's specialized for each of their developmental stages. So in preschool, they're going to talk about self-regulation and executive function. More in kindergarten through 5th grade, those elementary school years, they're going to talk more about making friends and problem solving, and then 6, 7, and 8 grades are going to talk more about communication. That CASEL targets core social and emotional learning domains, and they really cover 5 of them: self-awareness, or recognizing their own emotions; self-management, being able to have self-control even through stressful situations; social awareness, which is essentially empathy; relationship skills, how to develop and grow positive relationships; and responsible decision making. And that's just that knowledge of what ethical behavior is, and then on the flip side, of course, what are consequences. When students are coping with stress, we can see that older children generate more coping alternatives to stressful situations than do their younger counterparts. A lot of times, outcomes for children who experience disasters are going to be under a good amount of stress. And of course, this depends on the severity of the disaster and their family support. But in the classroom, if a child is experiencing a certain disaster in their life. They're going to have acute stress reactions, depression, panic disorder, or post-traumatic stress disorder. They don't have to have these things, but these are things that you should be aware of that you might see in your classroom. When we look at moral development, the textbook goes into a good deal about Kohlberg's moral development and his 6 stages of that moral development. And you can see that he has some ideas there that morality is not internalized. His stage 1, you can see that moral decisions are based on fear of punishment. When they move into stage 2, we can see that the individuals pursue their own interests but lets others do the same, and what is right involves equal exchange. As they move to stage 3, we can see mutual interpersonal expectations, relationships, and interpersonal conformity. And that leads us to stage 4, when moral judgments are based on understanding, social order, law, justice, and duty. And that leads us to our last 2. In stage 5, there's a social contract or utility and individual rights. And stage 6 is universal ethical principles. And humans, Kohlberg says, will go through all of these 6 stages. Rather than me just telling you what the book said, because you've already read the book, there is a link on Canvas, and it is entitled Kohlberg's 6 Stages of Moral Development. It's roughly 7 minutes long, but I would like for you to pause this right now and listen to it. As you're listening to it, though, make sure that you kind of are really grasping the concept. So that means that you have to watch it maybe even 2 times, because we're going to use this video also in our observation discussion for this week. So go ahead and pause this and watch that video, and then come back to me. So one of the many critics of Kohlberg's theory talks about more of gender and the care perspective. So we have Kohlberg's justice perspective, and it focuses on rights of individual and how they independently make moral decisions. Well, this gal, Gilligan, she has the concept of a care perspective, and she views people in terms of connectedness with others. It emphasizes interpersonal communication, relationships with others, and concern for others. And one of the things that in the criticism that she points out is that most of Kohlberg's research was with males rather than females. And so a lot of most of the responses when he was researching came from males, and that's how he modeled his theory. The other video, you're going to watch 2 for your observations, is the Kohlberg video that you just watched. And the second video that you're going to watch is Gilligan herself speaking about the idea of this gender one-sidedness of Kohlberg's theory, and how her care perspective has a different perspective of moral development. When we look more into gender, of course there are gender stereotypes. Quite honestly, they are still present, meaning in the year that we are in now. And as children continue to grow, they have these gender stereotypes as young children, and they really do continue to change through middle grades. And there are similarities and differences between boys and girls, if it's physically, cognitively, or social-emotional. But there is a lot of times when kiddos will stereotype who's good at language arts or math, writing, who has more aggression, more emotion, who has more pro-social behaviors. All of those things are really stereotypes. We can see here that there are you can see there are female, male, average female, average male, and we can look at verbal skills, writing skills, achievement and how closely that they all really score. And so we really can say that it is a stereotype. There really isn't much differences. There are going to be differences in everything, but nothing that science can really tack down. When we're talking about families of children ages 8 to 11, we can see that families and parent-child relationships are changing during this time. A lot of times parents are spending less time with their children during these middle and late childhood. Parents are going to step in and really support and stimulate children's academic achievement. They are referred to as gatekeepers or scaffolders, and so they can really open the door to a lot of important things for children, or they can really help out and scaffold and help build these educational supports. At this time, parents use less physical forms of punishment as children age, and we can see that at about age 12 is when kiddos can begin to relate to adults outside of the family, and so they kind of move more toward an autonomy role at this point. Parents become more managers. They can manage children's opportunities or their behaviors. They can initiate social contact. A lot of times there are more mothers that are playing this role than fathers, but really the most important role that these that families are playing for kids this age is to maintain a structured and organized family environment. This positively relates to students' grades, self-responsibility, and negatively to school-related problems, which is really important. Earlier, we talked about attachment in families in earlier modules, and we can see that attachment in families at this age group becomes more sophisticated. Children are spending less time with their parents and their social worlds are expanding, but we can see that children that have already gained this secure attachment with their families have an associated lower levels of internalized symptoms, anxiety, or depression. And they have higher levels of emotional regulation and recognizing emotion, which is something that we really care about as educators. We can see in their peer groups, their friend groups, a lot of developmental changes. They are seeing that it's important to be able to both be equal in relationships. Their size of friend groups will increase, and their interaction is less closely supervised by adults. Children's preferences for same-sex peer groups increases, and so the girls are going to hang more with the girls, and the boys are going to hang more with the boys. A lot of times, popular children will frequently be nominated as a best friend and rarely disliked by their peers. And kids at this age are understanding the process of that and how that actually happens. And so the text breaks down average children, neglected children, rejected children, and controversial children, and how exactly they kind of rank in their peer classes and their peer groups at school. Social cognition is thoughts about social matters. It's important to understand peer relationships, and the text talks about steps that children will go through in processing social information, and it's a little bit more complicated than maybe some adults can give credit to. And when we look at bullying in schools, a third of students report bullying. This can include verbal or physical behavior, and its intention is to disturb someone else less powerful. It's most likely to be bullied are boys. Anxious, awkward, withdrawn, and younger middle school students are most likely to be bullied. These bullied children will often report loneliness and difficulty making friends. A cause of concern, which is not really new, but something that we need to make sure that we are aware of as educators, even if we're not seeing it with our own eyes in our own classrooms, is the idea of cyberbullying and how that is going to come into your classroom, even if it's not happening specifically on your classroom time. Outcomes of bullying, a lot of times these kids will suffer from low self-esteem, depression, suicidal ideation, and attempted suicide. As adults, these adults will continue to have anxiety, depression, and they will need care for mental health services. Friendship is a huge part of children this age group. Their friends are typically characterized by similarities. So who do you have things in common with? But friendships function many different purposes. Companionship, they have a familiar partner to live life with. Stimulation, they're fun. Physical support, time, resources, assistance. Ego support, it can provide them support emotionally. Social comparison, it gives kiddos the info about the place and their kind of place in their in their world at school. And affection and intimacy, it may not appear until early adolescence, but intimacy in friendships is self-disclosure and sharing of private thoughts, and that will again happen at a little bit older of a time. When we look at schools, the textbook breaks down two different approaches to student learning: constructivists and direct instruction. Constructivists, that approach is more learner-centered, and it emphasizes the importance of individuals actively constructing their own knowledge and understanding with guidance from a teacher. So a lot of times if you're going to go into a classroom and the teacher is more teaching with a constructivist approach, it's not going to be as much teacher-led, but student-led, and the teacher is working his or her way around the classroom, making sure that the students are on task, and if they have any questions that they can't figure out or answer on their own. Direct instruction is something that you're probably more familiar with. It's very structured, it's teacher-centered, the teacher has the direction and the control. They are going to master academic skills that are led from high expectations of student progress, and maximum time is spent on learning tasks and the efforts to keep negative effects to a minimum. And so that is, when you walk into that classroom, the teacher is going to be up front and they are going to be leading that instruction, even if there are a good amount of kids that do not need that for being above or below cognitively. When we look at schools, in the 1990s, accountability really became of great importance, and we had No Child Left Behind, and currently that legislation is being replaced with Every Student Succeeds Act, and it's implemented during 17-18 school year, and it's not specifically eliminating these standardized tests, but more modifying them. I would like for you to stop really quickly, roughly 3.5 minutes, pause this, and you are going to watch a video that is Every Student Succeeds Act explained. And again, it's about 3.5 minutes, but I think it's really important that you hear exactly what this act is all about. The socioeconomic status or ethnicity and culture. Students from low income or minority backgrounds have more difficulties in school and not overcoming barriers to achievement. And U.S. students have lower achievement in math and science than a number of other countries. And this is disconcerting for U.S. teachers. Socioeconomic status, ethnicity, and culture. We can see that education of students from low-income backgrounds face more barriers to learning. Schools in low-income areas tend to have more students with low achievement test scores, lower graduation rates, smaller percentage of students going to college. A lot of times they'll have young teachers with less experience, and they have fewer resources, including decent buildings, which are all very important things for students to be able to learn and grow in. When we look at ethnicity in schools, strategies for improving relationships among ethnically diverse students is really important, and teachers can do a couple different things. They can turn their class into a jigsaw classroom, and this is one form of a cooperative learning group. They can encourage students to have positive personal contact with diverse other students, and a lot of times that's after school when they can have real relationships, doing an activity that they both enjoy rather than just both being present in a classroom. Teachers can work on reducing bias. They can display and represent diversity. They can resist stereotypes in their classroom. They can view school and community as a team. If it is like a team between the management, mental health, and parents, if everyone is working together. And they can be competent cultural mediators. And so they are making sure that cultural competence is happening in their classroom, and it's something that they are valuing, and so they can play a big role in that. When we look at cross-cultural comparisons of achievement, it is very disconcerting, and we can see there's a decline from elementary school to high school students and the way that test scores trend. We can see in 2015, Trends in the International Mathematics and Science Study found that out of 48 countries, 11th grade American students placed in 4th grade math. And I'm sorry, I said that the wrong way. American children placed 11th in 4th grade math, and they placed 8th in 4th grade science out of 48 countries. Asian teachers typically spend more time teaching math than American teachers, and Asian children spend more days out of the year in school than American children, and they're doing that because these Asian countries typically score higher than the American countries. And then a lot of times we can have a mindset of how we are achieving and moving forward. And so the text goes into a little piece about having a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And that fixed mindset is that those qualities that we have as teachers or those qualities that we have as a school district is carved in stone. We can't change it. That's fixed mindset. And then a growth mindset is that we can change and we can improve. And moving forward, that is what all schools and districts and teachers should have in their classroom, is that growth mindset to do better for all of our kids. If you guys have any questions, please let me know, and I look forward to seeing our lively debate on moral development this week.